So, I wanted to ask you about periodization, and the reason being, I find this time of year quite tricky. It's difficult to know how to train at the minute because it's so long until I have an event coming up, and I think I have a lot of athletes who have a similar trouble. Right, they're not sure what to do at this time of year when it's quite far away from sort of race season. And I just wanted to ask you how you handle that with your athletes in terms of approaching their training planning.
Yeah, so I guess when it's put that way, one of the challenges we are faced with is being in Central Alberta. We do get limited daylight hours, which hurts some people mentally with training. We get the cold weather, so you can't do as much outside. So again, every athlete being different, you got to find different motivators this time of year. I think is one of the big things. Typically, with my athletes, I'll set up. We might go out and do a half marathon race every 6 weeks, as an example, something to
All
keep
right.
them motivated.
Okay.
Each year I know it's a little bit getting spoiled, but the last, I don't know what it is now, maybe 6 years, I've gone down to either Arizona or Nevada in say February ish, just to do
Yeah.
a training camp for 5 or 6 days. And
Oh.
and if people sign up for it and they go down, they know that they have to be in reasonable
Mm.
shape to do it, right? If we're going to go out and do 100K, or some of us might do 160K bike rides and things like that, where
Mm-hmm.
they know they have to be ready. You can't just show up and train for 6 days without some level of fitness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where it gets difficult, it is a hard time of year because the races can seem so far off,
Mm.
and that's challenging. And with the advent of Zwift being a big thing, we can still create online community that way. And then with the limited interaction in person we've had for the last year and a half,
Mm.
you can meet online.
Yeah.
And it's a bit surprising to me how much people enjoy it, but you kind of get people. You need that motivation for most people of a race or an event coming up. Even if it's little ways off in the distance, you still need that a lot of times, right?
Mm.
And so trying to create that carrot, if that's what you want to call it,
Mm.
for people to kind of chase after, is almost always necessary for athletes, right?
Yeah.
So
So
we're
it's
trying to
almost like
find
you
that.
you sort of artificially segmenting the year and creating a training goal in the, whether it's the training camp or half marathon every 6 weeks, or you pick something to train towards that isn't so far away to allow people to find that motivation.
Right. That's right. Like one of the, I know we're talking a little bit about periodization and the traditional versus
Mm.
non-traditional types, but the traditional is you start out here and then you build up your volume, just progressively building up the volume. And that gets to be a tough thing in the winter here. If you're just sitting on your bike spinning for endless hours,
Yeah.
I actually don't know anybody who enjoys it.
I
and
tried it.
and
It was
so
terrible.
yeah, it's meant, there's only so much TV you can watch,
Yeah.
or you know so it gets to be a challenge. So following that traditional model is really difficult in the off
Mm.
season if you're just, that whole idea of just sending endless miles, or that traditional idea of building a giant base of aerobic fitness.
Mm.
it We always have to consider people's mental states or their mental
Yeah.
strength, or is this even fun? Like, this has got to
Mm.
be a fun sport. And if you're just sitting spinning at the same power, or just doing endless really low heart rate type of miles
Mm.
on the treadmill, people can only put up with that for so long.
Yeah.
And and so that's where I don't follow that traditional model. One, people just don't like it,
No.
and if they don't like it, they're not going to do it,
Mm.
and then they're out of the sport. And
Yeah.
I mean, you deal with athletes all the time, and the Ironman is a really interesting one where people get burned out.
Hmm.
And they think that you got to put in, all these 6 and 7 and, hour rides on the weekends just at a low effort. And they start to hate it. And
Yeah.
this is our hobby. This is our spare, our fun time. Right. And all of a sudden it's not fun.
Yeah.
And so that's where I don't think, unless you have endless time and you want to potentially go, professional or something like that, where you're dedicating your life to it, I don't think that really low effort, high volume is sustainable for very many people. So that's why I don't tend to go that direction at all.
I mean, everything you were saying was resonating exactly for me, to be honest, about, um, so I got into triathlon about 2, 3 years ago, maybe three now, two, I'm not sure. COVID makes everything hard to remember.
Fair enough.
So I read Joe Friel's triathlon training Bible on most of it, and I was sort of planning out, and he was talking about building this big aerobic base, initially, and then exactly as you said, layering on more intensity as the year progressed. So it was fall or coming into winter, and I tried to do exactly what you described. So I would schedule to do like a 4 hour ride on the trainer, and I would like line up 3 movies I was going to try and watch. And
Yeah.
I was, just same pace, trying to keep the heart rate and the intensity low. And exactly as you said, I just couldn't do it. Like I did it a few times, but what I inevitably started doing was shortening those long rides because it was just torturous. It was I would shorten it down to 3.5 hours and then 3 hours and then if I do 2.5, that's enough.
Right.
And exactly like you said, I would dread it. I would be Friday night. I'd be like, I gotta do that stupid awful trainer ride tomorrow. Like
Yeah.
it's so and in the winter in Canada, training for I mean, I suppose I could have run, but even really long runs in the winter in Canada they're quite a different beast. They're quite unpleasant in a lot of ways, just because of the cold.
Yeah.
And the treadmill is just as bad as the trainer. And if you've got Zwift, that's great. But I mean, if you're just going the same pace all the time at a really low effort, Zwift isn't, I guess, I haven't used it, but I'm guessing it's not really that much more motivational for that, right? Because you just go the same pace all the time.
Right.
You're not like increasing your power and reducing and that kind of stuff. So it sounds like where I ended up is actually quite similar to what you recommend, which is like, yes, that might be physiologically beneficial, but practically speaking, it's undoable. So
Right.
a different approach to the sort of training year is the way you go. So how you've got you're like, okay, I'm going to break it up a bit. Training camps potentially halfway through the winter, and maybe these little mini races that you schedule.
Mm-hmm.
How do you then plan the training? Because are you okay because it's a recreational athlete to sort of have the annual training look fairly similar, or do you like there to be differences in the training, volume and intensity and stuff at different times of the year? How do you approach that?
That's a good question. Yeah, like there's definitely different periods of types of training. So, what I've found over the years, and it's great that I've been doing this for, I don't know what it would be, probably coaching people now for maybe 8 years or whatever it is, something in that ballpark. But what I've found is people can do a high volume for a time. So,
Right.
if I give them even a 2 week block of high volume, they can do that. They know that in 14 days, I'm not going to be putting in this much time.
Mm,
And when there's an end date like that versus the mental state of, holy smokes, this is quite a bit, and then next week's going to be more, and then next week's
mm,
going to be more, and that gets mentally tough. And I think that, so that's where I can go high volume for some people for a short time, but there has to be that end date. And,
mm-hmm.
like it's been well documented as well, just on a side note, like, man, these things can cause relationship breakdown, right? And I am not in the business of having that. So it has to be realistic for people's lives, whether their spouse allows them to do it and I like to plan this far ahead so that we can know when this period of time is. And so
Mm.
then they can talk to their significant others and say, hey, I got this, maybe it's 10 days of like pretty heavy training. Can we plan around it a little bit better?
Mm-hmm.
Right. But my philosophy, which would be a little bit different than some of these, like Joe Friel, right? Of course, I've read all of his stuff. I think everybody has.
Mm.
Uh, Mine's a little bit different in a sense that I would include some form of strength work or speed work in just about every session,
Mm.
right? Where I think that you can get a lot of the same physiological benefits in a shorter amount of time,
Right.
and it's more entertaining for people. And really, when you look at it, and this is maybe the physio in me, and we'll see if you and I agree on this, but I'm really big on strength because I look at efficiency of movement.
Mm.
Can can somebody hold the arrow position on a bike for 90 kilometers? Or do they start to have a breakdown and they're
Mm-hmm.
not strong enough to hold it? And I mean, we could talk about strength training and what we focus on, you know, off the swim, bike, and run, but just strength
Mm-hmm.
training. That could be a whole other topic, right?
Yeah.
Um, but I'm a big believer in efficiency of movement. If you can keep good form through, the half marathon or the full marathon, you're going to have a pretty good result. If you
Mm-hmm.
go to any race and you start watching people, you're going to see form breakdown everywhere. And I think if you become strong, you can hold it together better. And so that's where I kind of go down that route is, hey, if we can get you strong, that's going to be a bigger limiter for the majority of people than aerobic fitness even.
And when you say strong, like, and you're referencing their holding arrow position, so that's the aerodynamic position for the entirely running crowd. There is you lead
Right.
out on the
Fair
bike.
enough. Yeah, of course.
But we do have some triathlete listeners, right? So, but that's holding that low position. And I think the same would apply to running, right? Because we know as the race goes on, you turn into a sort of crumpled, hunched over mess, and you're sort of slamming your feet down. So we all know that our form deteriorates the longer we go
Yeah.
into an event. When you're thinking about training strength to hold your technique, are you specifically doing exercises in those positions or that look like those positions, or maybe drills on the bike or in your form, and that is the type of strength you're referring to? Or is it more, you're doing more traditional strength training, maybe lunges and squats and things like that, in order that you have the capacity to hold those positions for longer because your muscles don't fatigue, you've got more muscular endurance? So which way do you approach it?
Well, yeah, a little bit of. I'm a big believer in strength training outside of those. So if you're a runner, I still have all of my runners do some form of strength training. It can look a little bit different. Maybe, um, it doesn't mean you have to go to the gym and be doing four rep max type of workouts, but some form of strength training. But for the purposes, I think, of maybe what we're discussing today, I like strength training within the context of their sport. So, I know that nowadays with Strava and things like
Mm.
that, where people finish a workout, post it, and people can comment either good or bad. People kind of they focus a lot on their volume, and they focus on, of
Mm.
course, the two things that pop up are how far did you go and what was your average pace,
Yeah.
and then people make comments on it, and I want a lot of people to throw that out the window,
Yeah,
right?
that's so
Because
true.
it's everybody does it, right? The whole comparison mentality, where I can I'll get half marathon athletes doing power hiking on the treadmill just
Mm.
to build up glutes, hamstrings, low back,
Right. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so does that look sexy on Strava? Not at
No.
all. It
No.
there's nothing to brag about on it, right? Or biking, I'm a big believer as well as heavy gearing. Instead of cycling at 90 RPM that we might be able to hold out on the road, you might be doing extended intervals at 55 RPM, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pushing a really heavy gear, trying to build up that muscular strength and endurance, just that constant tension on the chain to
Mm-hmm.
build up that strength to hold that position for a better time.
Yeah, and is that what you mean by, you said that you often have longer workouts, like longer rides or longer runs, with a little bit of sort of, I think you said like intensity or something sort of sprinkled in, and you don't feel the need to sort of exclusively have like a long, slow kind of week or 2 weeks. You'll have that kind of theme, but then you'll put in maybe some intervals or some form drills or something within those workouts. Is that what you mean?
Yes. Yeah. So, like even I guess a simple one that I love to do because I think it adds fitness without stressing the body too much. But even, like let's say someone goes out to a 15K run on a Sunday and they get to finish it with 12 reps of 30-second hill sprinting,
Yeah.
something like that, where you're starting to add a little bit of that strength and power at the end of an otherwise aerobic run. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's where I kind of go where uh, you know, if you go through and you talk to people at the end of a race, nobody ever says, "Hey, cardiovascular wise, I was done." If you go to a
Mm,
race, a lot of times it's like my quads were killing me, or
yeah.
my hamstrings were so tight,
Yeah.
and and it's a strength issue, right? And
Hmm.
so I tend to focus more on those areas than, hey, go out and run, go run really slow for 2 hours to build that aerobic. Again, when we are time sensitive athletes, which probably everyone listening is,
Mm,
what's the best bang for your buck,
yeah.
right? Like what's the most efficient use of your time? And constantly trying to address that strength issue is actually the best bang for your buck. That's
Yeah.
what wants to be addressed, right? So even in the majority of aerobic sessions, there is some type of speed or strength work that I'll try to incorporate into to not every session, but it's pretty close.
Right. Yeah. No, I think I'm gonna adopt that strategy because I've certainly been guilty of, almost the opposite. What a lot of people do is they'll go a bit too hard all the time, and I, sort of, I think drank the Kool-Aid a little bit too much on the low intensity stuff, and because I see that as my own weakness, that um, aerobic base. I sort of do everything in zones 1 and 2.
Right,
And I just think, oh, I can sprint. I know I'm reasonably fast over a sprint, so I'm not going to worry about that. But it does make my training quite boring. And,
right.
and also, there is elements that aren't cardiovascular, right? So if you, like you just said with that hill sprints at the end of that long run, in addition to the cardiovascular effect, you're going to have that anaerobic stimulus,
Hmm.
but you also, when you're looking at overall health, most of the people we're talking about here are not elite athletes. We're talking about recreational athletes. And in terms of, maintaining bone health, maintaining tendon health, avoiding injury, maintaining muscle strength, as they get older, maintaining a VO2 max that's relatively high, you kind of need that really intense stuff. And you see a lot of runners and cyclists and triathletes and ultra runners who are a little bit like me, especially as they get older. They sort of do everything slow. And, you ask them to sprint. And sometimes I've asked people to do sprint drills and they're like, I haven't sprinted in years. And you're like, well, that's not good, right?
Right.
You're a runner. You should be able to sprint quite often. And it's very important from a general health perspective, um, which is quite different to, like you said, when you read books, they're usually written for, athletes in their 20s who do nothing but train, and they're training to get to the Olympics. I mean, that's
From
so
what we're
different.
doing. Oh, well, that's the whole idea with that periodization is,
Mm,
with a lot of the work that's been done in that area, it's been done on elite athletes. And
mm,
it's been done in whatever we want to term elite athlete, but a lot of them are these, Olympic or Olympic hopefuls. And does it work? Yeah. But that's actually their life. That is
yeah,
what they do. They've dedicated their life to being this athlete that wants to be on the world stage. And the people you and I are dealing with, they're not those people. So when we look at this research that they're putting out, it's generally not done on average people. right?
Mm.
It's done on these super athletes who've
Yeah.
maybe done that sport since they were 12 years old, and that's all they do, right? And so it's not fair. And even, if we want to go back to some of these books that I'm sure we've both read and some of the research we've done, like this whole idea of 3 weeks on, 1 week off, like 3 weeks
Mm.
pushing, 1 week recovery. Um, Boy, 3 weeks for someone who's working 40 or 50 hours a week and is running kids around to sports and music and maintaining relationships. Man, you're building 3 weeks on of progressively
Mm.
increasing intensity and training load. That's a long time.
Mm.
Yet that was the model for so many years. And I just find it wholly unrealistic, right? Like it's just such a long time to continually add stress to the body when they're probably dealing with stress outside of training,
So
right?
how do
And
you approach it? That do you have like down weeks? Do you ramp up as weeks pass? Do you do one up, one down? Or do you have them all pretty similar and just ask some people how they're feeling? Like, how do you approach that balance between training stress and training recovery, which we need to have in balance? How do you approach that in terms of scheduling weeks or months or days in advance?
yeah, it's again, like where we live, or I guess this could be anywhere, but also dealing with people who shift work, right?
Right. Yeah.
So there's a guy
Yeah.
who's he's a week up north, and then he's a week at home. And so when he's up, he's going away to work away from home. Um, he's putting in, I believe it's 12 to 14-hour days, and he's got to find time to eat and sleep, and right. So how much training time does he realistically have? Very, very little.
Zero.
So when he's home, it's typically a heavy week. When he
Yeah.
goes away, it's a forced light week, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so that's where it becomes a little bit individual. But I definitely find that the 3 weeks on, 1 week off, if you want to look at that, is very few people can maintain it. I would say, if I was to pick, say, an average person that I deal with, it's more like 10 days of training, 10 or 11, and then you get 3, 4 rest days. I've just found that people tend to, and again, it goes back to that mental part of, okay, I can push for 10 days. Man, those
Mm.
4 days of recovery are going to be pretty awesome. And it's
Mm.
not that far in the future
Yeah.
that they're like, yeah, I can push for 3 more days. And then thankfully, I get this recovery period. And I find that kind of that short build, little break, short build, little break, that it's both mentally and physically good for people, right?
Yeah,
I
I
find that,
mean, that sounds a lot better than what I've been trying to do.
right.
the and it sounds. I mean, if I was to try and sum up what you're saying, it does sound like you don't find a lot of value for the people you're working with in more traditional training programming. So making a whole year of annual training planning and having a structure where we go 3 up, 1 down, or 4 up, 1 down, or 2 up, 1 down, or having a block where you're going to focus on VO2 max and then a block where you focus on hill sprints. Do you know what I mean? It doesn't sound like those kind of things are really all that useful to you. Would that be fair?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, uh, it is very difficult to maintain that. I mean,
Mm.
it's funny because I do, with every athlete that I'm coaching, I do have that annual training plan.
Mm-hmm.
And then I find that within 2 weeks or 2 months, sorry, you might as well rip it up and start over, because life happens, right?
Yeah.
Like, and things change, and all of a sudden, they were going to go to, they're going to go to the mountains for a week of camping, and theoretically, they're going to train every day. And then they realize, oh, you know what? My husband said I can't actually go and run for hours every day, kind of right. And then you tear it up and you kind of start over. So
Yeah.
so I now do. This is true that I have the annual training plan, but I now do it with pencil, and it's constantly being erased and redone.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay.
but that's where I start out. Like every time that I talk to an athlete, it's the same question they get every single time. How are you feeling?
Yeah.
First question I start out with every time. And then they usually tell me, about their life. And
Mm.
and as we get to know each other and develop a relationship with some of the longer term athletes, they start to tell you like, no, you know what? Like maybe they have a sick kid and man, it's been stressful because I can't sleep. Well, then guess what? I got to go in and change the program. It's got to be
Mm.
altered what they're doing because now they're dealing with a new stress load over here. Boy, what I have planned for you probably isn't ideal for your body. So we better peel back a bit here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, so you can have these long range plans, but people's lives change, on a day to day basis. And so therefore, you can have the best plan, but it's very, very difficult to execute.
How do you approach? Because this is something I come up against a lot, and I don't know that there is a sort of cookie cutter. This is how I deal with it kind of approach. But I mean, in my own training, I'd imagine in yours, in any athlete I'm working with training, it's almost like they always need more recovery. We almost always seem to need a more stress reduction because the sort of plate, which includes their training stress and their family stress and their work stress and their lack of their sleep and diet, it's almost like it's never really okay. What we definitely have room for here is more training. We're almost always trying to reduce, but then they're also, they're coming to you wanting to get fit for a race and do well in the race. So you need to have training. Like, how do you approach, getting sufficient training in with the fact that everybody seems to be just overstressed, you know, in other areas of their life?
Yeah. Well, that's a really I always that's a good way to look at it as a plate, right? I've always thought of the bucket. You got a bucket of
Okay.
stress. Now you got relationship stress, you got work stress, you got training stress, but I also think in there is I'm a what you eat. Do you have nutritional stress?
Mm,
Do you have right? Do you sleep? Another big issue, right? Do you sleep? That can be a stress, not sleeping. Like I do think that sometimes the body is more capable than we might give it credit for, but you do
mm,
have to manage it. I think you have to manage what you eat. I think that you got to manage your sleep. And this is a big one that's beyond my scope of practice, but life stress.
mm,
Because if you're constant, I've heard that said many times before, where the body can't decipher what type of stress. The body just feels stress,
yeah.
right? And so
Stress
if
is
you
stress.
have that's right, stress is stress. So now if you start to load and overload the body from a physical stress, but you're dealing with, you're worried because your boss is mean to you, and that's all you think about all day. I think that's actually going to affect your training. And
Hmm.
that's where when people are honest with me, then I go through and I would have to incorporate a little bit more in the way of recovery time. And a common approach I've had with people who get busy with work is maybe we take Monday and Tuesday off of training altogether, and that is time for you to deal with all get caught up in life, get caught up and try to get ahead and work Monday,
Mm,
Tuesday, which then makes the training better Wednesday through Sunday. And that's
yeah.
an approach I've had with a couple people right now that I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that's where you got to find that balance, right? And that's where that traditional model of periodization wouldn't work,
Yeah.
where they can actually go pretty good for 5 days. Then they got 2 recovery days every single week to start their week,
Hmm.
right? And so
Yeah.
that's
So
just a
you
different type
sort
of
of,
approach, right?
it's almost like you're carving out a little space in their life, which is
Right.
doable. Because I think as well, a lot of, I mean, I know I do. People use training as a way to help them relieve stress, to help them find some balance in their life because it's enjoyable. It is physically demanding, but that's almost part of the fun. So if you take too much away and say you need to rest more and go and do, I don't know, go meditate for like 3 hours a day, they're probably not going to come back.
Right. Well, it's funny you say that because my wife, she doesn't run. She doesn't like running.
Mm,
Um, but she has said many times, man, runners are just happier people. And I'm
yeah.
like, yes, they are. They're
Mm,
just like it's good to be around. I just recently ran the Calgary Marathon. My daughter did the half marathon,
mm,
and my wife and my three boys just cheered us on. And it was great, because afterwards my wife said, like, that was one of the best days I've had in a really long time. And just
Mm,
every that atmosphere, and strangers cheering on other people,
mm,
and friends going in and kind of like racing against each other, and like, it was great. It was amazing. It felt
yeah.
incredible. And but that's what our sport can do for us, right? Is it is a mental break. And maybe you've dealt with this too, dealing with um, with some athletes, I guess, where they've done their A race and they get that hangover, and they're like, ugh, okay, I'm
Yep.
done. I need a break. And I
Mm.
say, yeah, go take a break. Take as much time as you want right now. And many times they've come back a week or 10 days later and been like, okay, I miss it. Like I love it. This is a
Yeah.
big part of my life. Like, and they
Yeah.
need it for that mental, that it's as much mental as it is physical, right?
Yeah.
And that's what people, I don't know, sometimes I think people, they think we're weird, maybe, right?
Mm,
That,
yeah.
why would you do that? And it's like, well, I love it and it makes me happy.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
That'll do. That's a good reason.
Yeah. And I mean, let's be honest. I mean, my father-in-law is a counselor, and he said to me the one time, like, everyone's addicted to something.
Mm,
And he said, yours just happens to be endurance sport. And I said, yeah, I love it. Like,
yeah.
I talk about it every day. I think about it. Um, the people I meet are awesome. Like, that's my thing. So he's like,
Mm,
that's a healthy thing, right?
mm,
And so it's just one of those things where I do believe in the whole mental, and that type of side of things, where my experience is like, people who are in these sports, these cyclists, these runners, these swimmers, they're actually just flat out happier people. And
mm,
that's
yeah.
that's who I want to be around, right? Yeah.
um, I think that's a lovely note to end it on. I know we've run out of time, and if for those listening, this wasn't our intention. We had scheduled longer, but we've had some pretty terrible technical issues, so we're going to cut it short. But I am going to make Craig promise to come back on the show in the not too distant future, and we're going to
Yeah, love it.
continue this conversation. I have about 1,000 more questions I'd like to ask you.
All
But if
right.
anyone's listening wants to connect with you, where should they go?
Well, the best place, I got, gritperformance.ca is my website I'm on, and then I'm under Grit Physio in my Instagram account. Uh, and man, I got to give you credits, Matt. Your Instagram, like, you're on top of all this stuff, like, constantly. You're, I'm like, just like, I'm not a techie. I'm not a, and I just like, man, I cannot keep up with this. But you, like, I gotta get you. You do a great job. So it's
Thank you.
awesome. But so I'm trying to be more consistent with it, and to
Mm,
provide a little bit of information, and a little bit of what I do on there as well, and have more fun with it, right?
mm.
And so, but that's where people can get a hold of me.
Cool. I'll put links to those in the show notes, and thank you for your kind words there, because it's definitely helpful. Because we always compare our worst aspects to other people's best. Do you know what I mean? So when I see your training on Strava, I'm always like, bloody hell, look how far I went today. His running pace is way faster than me for for a long run,
Right.
and, so it's very common that people will take things that people are doing well and think, and then they don't look at the rest of their life. Then they're not, we just look at that one bit,
Yeah.
and then we make ourselves feel bad.
That's right. Well, my wife, what's her common line is, comparison is the thief of joy,
Oh, that's
right?
a
So we're
nice one.
not
Yeah.
always supposed to be comparison, and so she's.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's actually a pretty good line. That's
I
not
like it.
bad. So, but that's what I found is a lot of times we go on Strava and things like that. We compare, and I'm like, no, let's just be ourselves, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I mean, yeah, I guess it's a balance. I want to let you go, but I think it's like sometimes you want to see what other people are up to. It can be motivating, but sometimes it can be, you know, unhelpful, unhealthy. It makes you feel bad. It doesn't cause any positive adaptation. It just kind of makes
That's
you
right.
feel like you're useless. That's a
Yeah.
less happy note to end on, but I know you've got to go, so I'm going to let you go.
Okay. All right.
Thank you,
Well, thanks for
Craig, and
having
thanks
me.
for being No problem. Thanks for being patient with the technical stuff. Hopefully next time it'll be a
Yeah.
bit smoother.
All right. Okay. Thank you
Okay,
very
take
much.
care, mate. Bye.
Take care.